Hello, everybody. If it's your first time with us, welcome. And if you've been around before, welcome back. Today, we're taking a look at some more checkmate patterns. And our next pattern up on tap is the two bishops against the lone king. So we'll take a look at our board here. We see white has the bishop pair, black's king is in the center, and we're working hard on trying to figure out how are we going to checkmate black's king. How can we finish off this game even though all we have are two minor pieces? Now, the first important thing we're always trying to do when we're getting checkmate, we got to get our opponent's king out of the center of the board. Our goal is going to be to drive this black king somewhere to an edge. It could be back to here, over to the side, over to this side. It doesn't matter which one. Ultimately, we got to get him to an edge, and then in the two bishops, not only do we have to do that, we're going to have to move him into a corner as well. So our goal is going to be to get him either to h8 or a8 over here. So how can we start with that? And what's our process for making this happen? Well, the first thing that I want to do, the first move here, is I'm going to go ahead and play my bishop on c5 to e3. Well, why am I doing that? Anytime we're working on getting our opponent's king to the edge of the board, the most important question to ask ourselves is what squares can my opponent's king go to? So we always want to visualize all of those squares that he can move to. And then we want to start cutting them off and moving him away from them. So you'll notice my dark square bishop cuts off two squares here. It cuts off f4 and d4. And my light squared bishop is cutting off e4 and d5. So it's going to start forcing the king either up or to the right. Now if we keep drawing lines off from these bishops' diagonals, you'll also notice that by placing my bishop on e3, we've sort of fenced in the opponent's king. We look at, there's a lot of lines on the board here right now, but all of these red squares are squares that the bishops are covering. And the light squares are the only ones left for the black king to go to. So how can the black king escape? Well, he really can't. He's trapped. What's great about this sort of setup with the two bishops next to each other is already there's only a small section of the board black can ever get his king to. So what are we going to do? Well, we're going to wait for black to move. And after he does, let's say he plays king to e6 here. We want to move our king to try to keep cutting off more squares from our opponent. So we're going to keep using our pieces, keep cutting off more squares from black. The more we can use our king to push the opponent to the edge, the better. And then when we need to, we'll use the bishops to keep drawing that fence in closer and closer. So let's go ahead and play the move here. King to d4. Coming up and cutting off these two squares from the black king. Now, this does allow black to be able to play the move, king to f5. Black's goal is quite simple. He wants to stay in the center as long as possible. But we're just going to keep cutting things off. He came from the e6 square, so let's go ahead and not let him go back. Let's play king to d5. Now we're blocking all three squares here. Our bishops are blocking these squares, and black has to go to one of two places. Where can black go? That's always what we want to try to ask ourselves. So let's say that he plays f6. Well, now is a good chance for us to use our bishop. Sure, we could move our king to e4 and cover the square he came from, but then black can just play back over to e6 here. How can we close that cage in on the fence? We already know what lines we're cutting off, and we want to make sure that that fence keeps getting smaller and smaller. So, black right now, he can escape to f5 or g6. Let's cut off both of those squares. Play the move bishop e4. Now, the bishop is cutting off this diagonal, the black one still preventing the black bishop from the black king from coming to g5. And black is going to have to go even further back. Only three squares left for him now. So let's say he plays king up here to e7. Well, now we've got black on the 7th rank. His only way to come back up would be back to the square he came from. So let's go ahead and make that fence even smaller. We've got two kind of ways we could do it. We could play our bishop to g5. I like the idea of bishop d4. Once again, when these bishops are together, we know they create a beautiful fence. That fence of the bishops is getting smaller and smaller. Look at black slowly getting suffocated here. So bishop g4, we're cutting off the f6 square now, and black has to do something to try to defend. Okay, so he goes king f7. Our bishops are already cutting off these squares around him. So how can we stop him from going back to where he was before? Now let's use the king, because if we use our bishop, if we play bishop c5, we're not going to control these two squares anymore, and black can move into those. So we want to keep control of the two squares that we already have and make sure that we keep cutting off more. So let's go king d6. Now we're controlling this square. Black's going to have to be forced back to the edge now. So king to e8. He's still trying to stay in the center of the board, but things aren't looking too good. Now we have him where we want him. So how can we try to finish black off? Well, let's stick with what we've been doing for one more move here. We know he just came from the f7 square, so we'd like to fence that square off. We'd like to pen it in. Our black bishop is covering this diagonal. Bishop d5 looks like a beautiful move. Now we're cutting off this one as well. And now you'll notice the black king is trapped on the first rank. Look at all the squares that we're controlling now. The only places this black king can ever move are back and forth on the edge here. So now the goal is to move that king into a corner and then get him to be mated. All right, how can we do that? Well, let's say black plays king f8. He's trying to maybe sneak out here. If we move our bishop off this diagonal, black would love to be able to sneak back out if we move our bishop away. Well, here comes an interesting point. We could play king to f6 if we wanted, but we know that black only has one move right now. He has to play king to e8. And when he does that, we have the option of taking control of the f8 square and cutting him off. So for example, if the black king were on e8 right now, we could play the move bishop g7, and then we would be controlling all of these squares, and we can start pushing black to the corner. So how can we lose a move here? We want to make sure we don't let black off of g7. We want to lose a move so that after black plays king e8, we can take control of the square he's on now, f8. Well, the answer is simply to move our bishop anywhere along this diagonal. So we're going to play a waiting move here. Let's go ahead and play bishop to e5. Once again, black only has one square that he can go to. So always asking ourselves, what squares can the black king go to? Black comes to e8. Now where can he go? Either f8 or d8. Well, like we said, our plan is to cut off f8. Bishop g7. Now all of these squares are stopped. Black has to come over here. You're starting to see how this is working. We're cutting off those squares of the black king. How can we force him to the corner? We could play bishop to b7 if we wanted to stop him from going to c8, but that's not going to get the black king to the corner. That sticks him in the center. Let's go ahead and play bishop to f7. Now black has to go to c8. So what squares can he come to now? Well, he's got three, and one of them is the 7th rank, right? We don't want him to escape over there. We could play bishop back to d5 to cut that off, but that would just be repeating the position. We just played our bishop to f7, and after king to d8, we would be in the same spot as before. So what do we want to do here? Now we're going to keep that opposition, use our king to drive him to the edge. Now our king is blocking all three squares. Black has to go b8 or d8. So he comes back over toward the center. He wants to escape. And now we've got a nice little move to keep forcing the black king that way. Our bishop here is already cutting off f8. The black king has two squares he can go to right now. He can come to e8, or he can come to e7 rather, or he can come to c8. Let's go ahead and attack. Bishop f6 check. Now we're blocking off all these squares and attacking the king. Once he comes back over, he can't even go back to where he was before, so he's already only got one place left to go. Well, let's go ahead and do it once again. Bishop e6 check. Black's forced further into the corner, and now our bishops are cutting off his escaping squares. We'll go ahead and make sure that he stays here, right? Black has two outs over here. We could play the bishop back to cut it off, but eventually we need to use these bishops to give check. We need to keep them to be able to deliver that check and that checkmate. So better now that opposition again. Keep the king blocking him out from the front, and then the bishops will attack from the side on the diagonal. So king b6. Only one move left, king to e a8. Now, this is a very important moment. Every time your opponent gets to the corner, and we're always asking ourselves, how many squares can he go to? Black only has one square that he can go to, b8. What we don't want to do is we don't want to give him 0 squares to go to. So if we cut off b8 but don't attack the black king, then it's going to be stalemate. So for example here, if we played bishop to e5, we would be attacking b8, but the black king is not in check. And this would be a draw. This would be stalemate. We don't want to do that. So that's why we're always asking ourselves, where can the black king go? We want to force him to the place we want, but we don't want him to have no place to go, or else we're going to have a draw. Now, we like our bishop on e6 here because it eyes the c8 square. Our king and our bishop are trapping out the opponent, and we have to figure out how are we going to finish this off? How are we going to give checkmate? Black's next move is going to be to b8, and when he does that, then we could play bishop e5 with check and attack and force him back to a8. But we can't do that right now. It's not our turn. Well, once again, that concept of the waiting move, right? So all we need to do is play this bishop on f6 to any square other than e5. Don't put him on e5 because we don't want him to cut off b8. But we just need to move him anywhere else. That way on the next turn, he can go ahead and give check. So let's play bishop e7. King comes to b8. Now we're already blocking these squares. Let's attack. If we give that check, we know it's not stalemate. The other king's under attack. The end is close now. King back to a8. How many squares can black go to? Well, he can't move anywhere. So if we can give check and black can't move anywhere else, that's going to be checkmate. How do we do it here? If you can't see it yourself, take a minute, think about it. Find the last move here. That's right, bishop d5, checkmate. Here we go, the two bishops cutting into the king's position, calling it a day. Our king blocks off the last square, and black has lost the game. Happy days for white. So that's how we use our two bishops to checkmate the opponent's black king. We want to make sure we fence that king in. Don't let him escape. Don't let him run back to the center of the board. Always ask ourselves, what squares can the black king go to? And then once he gets to the corner, making sure we don't end up in stalemate, play a waiting move at the right moment, and pounce when you're ready, deliver that checkmate. If you have any questions, be sure to leave them in the comments below. Hope you've enjoyed, and look forward to seeing your bishops taking fire at your opponent's kings.